I need to write a 5,000-word story in American English. Let me check the names to avoid first, then write the story. Names to avoid: Walter, Donna, Marcus, Dorothy, Raymond, Lily, Gerald, Christine, Trevor, Evelyn. I'll use Harold, narrator, 64. Brent, son-in-law. Sandra, daughter. Mia, granddaughter, 8. I called 911 on my own son-in-law, from inside my own house, on Thanksgiving, and I'd do it again. But before you judge me, or him, let me take you back to where this really started. Because it didn't start that day. It never starts the day everything falls apart. It starts quiet. So quiet you almost miss it. My name is Harold. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years with the county water department, and I live in the same house I bought with my wife, Patricia, back in 1987. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, a backyard with a pecan tree that drops more work than fruit every October. Patricia passed 6 years ago, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, the house got too big and too quiet at the same time, which is a strange thing to live inside. My daughter Sandra is 41. She's got her mother's eyes and, unfortunately, her mother's habit of seeing the best in people long after the evidence says otherwise. She married Brent 11 years ago. I won't tell you I had a bad feeling at the wedding, because that's not true. Brent shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, said he'd take care of my daughter. He had a job in commercial HVAC sales, made decent money, seemed steady enough. I gave him a fair shot. I always try to give people a fair shot. The first 5 years were fine. They had their own place over in Clarksburg, a rental but a decent one. Sandra worked part-time at a pediatric clinic. Brent moved companies twice but was always employed. They had Mia in 2017, and that little girl became the best thing in my life after Patricia left it. Mia, with her gap-toothed smile and her plastic dinosaur she carried everywhere in a purple backpack. I'd have done anything for that child. The trouble started, as it often does, with one phone call that sounded reasonable. It was March, 2.5 years ago. Sandra called on a Sunday evening. Brent's company had done layoffs. Not his fault, she said. Restructuring, she said. They were 2 months behind on rent and their landlord had already served notice. Could they stay with me? Just until Brent found something new. 3 months, maybe 4. Mia would love spending time with Grandpa. I sat on my porch with the phone against my ear and looked out at Patricia's old rose bushes that I'd been tending badly for 6 years, and I thought about what Patricia would have said. She would have said yes. She would have already been making up the guest room before Sandra finished asking. So I said yes. I want to be honest with you about something, because I promised myself this story would be honest. I didn't say yes with a full heart. I said yes with a worried one. There's a difference. But I told myself the worry was just me being selfish, not wanting my routine disrupted, not wanting noise in the house. I told myself Brent would find work quickly. I told myself 3 months was nothing. 3 months became 8 months, then 14, then 22. In those 22 months, Brent contributed exactly 1 month of grocery money, $400, handed to me with a kind of ceremony that made it clear he expected significant gratitude. And nothing else. No rent, no utilities. My electric bill nearly doubled that first summer because Brent kept the thermostat at 68 and Sandra said nothing. My water bill went up, my grocery costs tripled. I'm on a fixed income. I get my county pension, about $2,200 a month, and Social Security, another $1,400. Comfortable enough for one person living quietly. Not comfortable for 4 people, one of whom ate like a defensive lineman and had opinions about what kind of coffee I should keep in the house. Early on, I tried to address it directly. I sat Brent down at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us, about 4 months in. I told him I needed some contribution to the household expenses. I said $200 a month would help, even $300 when he found work. He nodded along, said absolutely, said of course, said he appreciated everything I was doing, and then nothing changed. When I brought it up a second time, he said things were complicated right now and he didn't appreciate being pressured in his own home. His own home. I let that phrase sit in my stomach for 3 days before I said anything back, and when I did, I said it calmly. I said, Brent, this is my home. I bought it 35 years ago. My name is on the deed. I'd appreciate it if you kept that in mind." He laughed. Not meanly, exactly. More like he thought I was being technical. Like I was citing a footnote. Sandra heard the conversation, and later that night she came to my bedroom door and asked if we could not make things tense. She said Brent was already stressed about work. She said she knew it was a lot to ask, but could I please be patient a little longer? I was patient. I kept being patient when Brent started rearranging the living room furniture without asking, claiming the old arrangement blocked the flow. I was patient when he began parking in the center of the driveway, which meant I had to squeeze past his truck to get my car out. I was patient when he invited his buddy over on Wednesday nights to watch football. The two of them loud until midnight, while I had work to do in the morning. I volunteer twice a week at the county library, helping seniors with digital literacy, and I take it seriously. I was patient when he started calling my house the house instead of Harold's house, as in, we've got people coming over to the house Saturday, without telling me, without asking. I want you to understand why I stayed patient so long. It wasn't weakness, although some days it felt like it. It was Mia. Every morning that little girl would come padding down the hallway in her sock feet and climb up next to me on the couch, and we'd watch an hour of nature documentaries before anyone else woke up. She called them animal shows. We had a whole system. She'd pick the animal, I'd find the documentary. Meerkats, humpback whales, a very serious 40-minute program about dung beetles that she absolutely loved. That hour in the morning was the best hour of my day, and I wasn't willing to blow up the situation and lose it. But I wasn't just being patient, I was also being prepared. Here's what I did quietly. Starting about 6 months in, I opened a separate checking account at a credit union across town from my regular bank. The one Brent had gotten himself added to my grocery account for convenience, which I'd allowed like an idiot, and corrected the moment I realized what had happened. I began keeping a notebook, every expense I could tie to their presence, utilities above my baseline, groceries, the plumber when Brent put the wrong things down the garbage disposal and cracked it, the new bathroom faucet because someone had left it running for 3 days. I kept receipts. I wrote down dates and amounts in blue ink in a composition notebook I kept in my sock drawer. I also called a housing attorney over in Millbrook. I didn't hire him, just a free consultation. I explained the situation. He explained my options. In our state, once someone has been living in your home for more than 30 days, even without a lease, they have tenant rights. You can't just throw them out. You have to serve written notice, 30 days for month-to-month occupants. If they don't leave, you file in magistrate court. It's a process. I wrote all of that down too. I told no one about the notebook. I told no one about the attorney. I told no one about the separate account. I just kept being patient, kept being grandpa, kept watching animal shows at 6 in the morning with Mia in her dinosaur backpack, and I waited. What I was waiting for, I didn't exactly know. Some moment when it would be necessary. Some moment when it would be necessary. Some moment when patience finally had a clear end. It came on a Thursday in November. Thanksgiving. I want to tell you what I'd done that day before everything happened, because the context matters. I had gotten up at 5:30 in the morning to start the turkey, 22-pound bird, the same brand Patricia always bought, rubbed with butter and thyme and a little smoked paprika. I'd made her cornbread dressing from memory. I made it wrong for 3 years after she died, and finally got it right in year 4. I'd done the sweet potatoes, the green beans with the shallots, the cranberry relish from scratch because canned cranberry sauce is a crime I refuse to commit in my home. I had been on my feet since 5:30 in the morning. Sandra had offered to help, and I'd said yes, but she got pulled into a call with her sister-in-law around 9 and didn't come back to the kitchen for 2 hours. That was fine. I didn't need help. I just would have liked company. Brent woke up around 10:30. I heard him in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. He came and stood in the doorway of the dining room, where I was setting the table. My grandmother's tablecloth, the china we'd gotten as a wedding gift, the good silverware that only came out 4 times a year. He watched me for a moment and said, "You set too many places." I looked up. I'd set 5: him, Sandra, Mia, me, and Sandra's cousin Patrice, who was driving up from Roanoke. Brent said he'd invited some people, his brother, his brother's wife, 2 of their kids. I said. "When did you plan to tell me this?" He shrugged. He said he figured I'd already made enough food. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I went back to the kitchen and started figuring out what I could stretch and what I couldn't. The turkey was big enough. I needed more dressing, more potatoes. I went to the grocery store at 11 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, which if you've ever done it, you understand the particular misery of. I spent $63 I hadn't planned to spend. I came home and worked through it. Brent's brother, a man named Keith, who was pleasant enough and clearly embarrassed by the situation, arrived at 2. His wife and kids arrived a few minutes after. Patrice came at 2:30. We had 9 people at a table I'd set for 5, unfolding chairs I'd had to dig out of the garage. Dinner was at 3. I brought everything out myself. Brent sat at the head of my table. Patricia's chair, the chair at the end closest to the kitchen, the chair I'd been sitting in since she died because it let me see the whole room. He'd moved into it while I was in the kitchen. I didn't say anything. I took the chair at the other end. We said grace. Patrice said it. She has a way with words, and I was grateful. The food got passed around, and I watched people fill their plates, and I felt, for just a moment, something that was almost like the old days, almost like noise in the house that had been too quiet. Then Brent said something to his brother, not loudly, but not quietly either. He said, "See, I told you this place works fine for a crowd. Plenty of room." His brother looked at his plate. I kept eating. Then, around 4 o'clock, I got up to clear some plates and refilled the sweet tea. I was coming back from the kitchen and Brent was standing at the doorway, blocking the hallway, talking to his brother. I said, "Excuse me." He didn't move. I said it, "Excuse me." He didn't move. I said it again. He glanced over his shoulder and said, "In a second." I stood there holding a pitcher of sweet tea for what felt like a full minute while he finished his conversation. Then he stepped aside without looking at me. I went back to the table. I sat down. I looked at my grandmother's tablecloth and Patricia's china and the food I had been cooking since 5:30 that morning, and I thought about the composition notebook in my sock drawer, and I thought about the housing attorney in Millbrook, and I thought about the 30-day written notice requirement under state law, and I thought, I'm done being patient. I excused myself from the table. I said I needed to make a phone call. Patrice was in the middle of a story and nodded at me without missing a beat. I went to my bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in my bedroom, in my house that I had paid for, and I took a breath. Then I called my attorney, not the housing attorney, my personal attorney, Ben Carver, who I've known for 20 years and who handled Patricia's estate and updates my will every few years. I called his cell. I apologized for calling on Thanksgiving. He said it was all right. He was in the middle of watching football and losing money on it. I told him the situation in about 4 minutes. The 22 months, the no rent, the notebook, the Millbrook attorney's advice about notice requirements. I told him what I wanted to do and asked him if I was missing anything. Ben said, "Harold, you can serve that notice tonight if you want. Get it in writing, hand it to them in front of witnesses. 30 days from the date of service, they either go or you file." I said, "I want to do it right." He said, "Then do it tonight. I'll draw up the formal notice document first thing Friday morning and email it to you. But a handwritten notice, signed and dated and witnessed, is legally sufficient in your state to start the clock." I thanked him. I hung up. I sat there for another minute. Then I opened my nightstand drawer and got out a piece of paper and a pen, a real pen, the kind that writes dark, and I wrote out the notice by hand. 30-day notice to vacate. I wrote today's date. I signed my name. I put it in my pocket. I walked back out to the dining room. The table was still full of people and food and noise. Mia had sweet potato on her chin and was telling Keith's daughter something very serious about the Triceratops. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at Brent. He was leaning back in my chair, Patricia's chair, with his arms crossed, laughing at something his brother had said. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Brent, Sandra, when you have a moment after dinner, I need to give you both something." Brent looked up at me with mild irritation, the look you'd give a waiter who'd interrupted at the wrong time. Sandra looked up with something more complicated. She knew my face, knew the quietness in my voice meant something. I said, no rush. Enjoy dinner. I sat back down. I ate. I made conversation with Patrice. I let the noise of the table wash over me and tried to feel something other than the piece of paper folded in my pocket. After dinner, when the kids had drifted to the living room and Keith and his wife were helping themselves to more pie, I caught Sandra and Brent in the kitchen. I pulled the paper from my pocket. I handed it to Sandra first. She read it. Her face changed in a way I hadn't seen since her mother's diagnosis. She said, "Dad." Brent looked over her shoulder at the paper. Then he looked at me. His expression shifted through several things quickly. Surprise, then dismissal, then something harder. He said, "You're serious?" I said, 30 days from today. I need you to understand this is not a negotiation. It's a notice. My attorney will send the formal paperwork tomorrow." Brent said, "This is our home," I said calmly, and I want you to hear how calm I was because I had been planning for this moment, and calm was what I had prepared. I said, "No, it's my home. I bought it in 1987. My name is the only name on the deed. You have 30 days. He said some things after that. He raised his voice. He used language I won't repeat because Mia was 20 feet away and could hear. He said I was doing this out of spite. He said no one in his family had ever treated him this way. He said I was a selfish old man who didn't appreciate what family meant. I let him say all of it. Then I said, "Keith and your wife are welcome to stay as long as they need this evening. The guest room is yours tonight as always. I'm going to sit on the porch for a while." I looked at Sandra. "I love you. This isn't about you, but 30 days. I went to the porch. I want to tell you about the next 30 days because this is where I think people get the story wrong. They think the paper is the ending. It's not. It's just the beginning of the real thing." Brent did not respond well to the notice. The first week, he alternated between coldness and outbursts. He told Sandra I had turned on them. He sent me a long text message that I read once and saved as a screenshot, which Ben Carver told me to do. He made comments under his breath in the kitchen, loud enough to hear, quiet enough to deny if asked. The thermostat went back up to 68 and I let it go, because it wasn't worth the fight and I was watching the calendar. Sandra cried. She cried in the kitchen one evening thinking I couldn't hear from the living room. I could hear. That was the hardest night of the 30 days. I went in and I sat with her at the table and I told her, and I meant every word, that she was always my daughter, that nothing between me and Brent touched that she and Mia would always have me. I told her this wasn't abandonment. It was a boundary that should have been set 2 years ago, and I was sorry I hadn't set it sooner, because the delay had made everything worse. She said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I had thought about this. I had actually started making calls 2 weeks before the notice quietly. There was a 2-bedroom apartment in Clarksburg, same town where they'd lived before, same school district for Mia, $1,400 a month. Not cheap, but manageable. I had called in a favor with a man I know on the county housing board and gotten Brent moved up on the list for a job lead that was actually in his field. I handed Sandra a folder with the apartment information, the job listing, and a personal check for me for 3 months' rent deposit and first month $5,600, which I had been saving in that separate account for exactly this purpose. She stared at the folder for a long time. I said, "I'm not throwing you out. I'm helping you land somewhere better than you're standing right now." By day 26, they had signed a lease. By day 29, the truck was loaded. The morning they left, Mia wrapped both arms around my waist and buried her face against my shirt and held on for what felt like a whole minute. I held on too. I told her Grandpa's house was still her house every other weekend, every holiday she wanted, every summer she wanted to come and watch animal shows. I told her the pecan tree would still need cleaning up in October and she could help if she wanted to. She looked up at me and said, "Will the dung beetles be okay?" I said, "The dung beetles are going to be fine." Brent walked past me to the truck without speaking. I didn't chase it. Sandra hugged me at the door. She didn't say much, but she held on, and I held on, and that was enough for that day. In January, about 6 weeks after they moved out, Brent got the job. County mechanical contractor, $48,000 a year plus benefits. Not his dream job, but a real one. He called me, which surprised me. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't hostile. He said he appreciated the job lead. I said, I want things to be different between us. He said, yeah, that's all we said. But it was more than nothing. Sandra calls me every Sunday. Mia comes most weekends, and we are 3 episodes into a very serious documentary series about migratory birds. She has added a plastic flamingo to the dinosaur collection in the purple backpack. I kept the notebook. Ben Carver advised me that I had grounds to pursue the back expenses in small claims court, somewhere in the range of $9,000 to $12,000, when you account for utilities, groceries above my normal spending, and the plumbing repair. I've thought about it. Some days I think I'll file. Some days I think the $5,600 I gave Sandra is enough of a wash, the cost of getting here cleanly. I haven't decided yet, but the notebook is in my sock drawer, and I know exactly what's in it. There's something I think about, sitting on this porch on winter evenings when the air smells like wood smoke and the pecan tree is bare. I think about that first Sunday phone call, 2.5 years ago, when Sandra asked if they could stay. I think about the worry I felt before I said yes. I should have listened to the worry. Not to be cruel. I never wanted to be cruel. But because the thing kindness requires, if you want it to actually work, is a structure around it. A shape. A container. Without that, kindness just becomes a thing other people live inside of, and you disappear. I love them enough to let them stay too long. I think I love them better now for having finally made them go. Patricia would have said yes that Sunday evening faster than I did. But I think, I have to believe this, she would have made the same phone call eventually. Maybe sooner. She always had more spine than people gave her credit for. The roses she planted are doing better this year. I looked up a pruning guide and actually followed it. They're not perfect, but they're getting there. Some things you just have to be willing to cut back before they can grow right. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. And the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the Thanksgiving dinner, or the 30-day notice, or even that moment in the hallway with the sweet tea. What keeps coming back is the notebook in my sock drawer, because that notebook is really the whole story, not the argument, not the phone call to Ben. The notebook, the quiet, unglamorous act of writing things down in blue ink for 16 months before anything came to a head, that's where the real decision got made. Every time I uncapped that pen and added another date and another amount, I was choosing not to disappear. I was choosing to be a person who kept track, who paid attention, who didn't let the slow drift of other people's convenience become the permanent shape of his life. Nobody told me to do that. I didn't read it in a book. I just understood, somewhere around month 6, that patience without preparation is just suffering with a polite name. And I'd suffered enough already. Burying Patricia. Learning to be alone in a house built for 2, figuring out how to prune roses and make cornbread dressing, and watch nature documentaries with a 7-year-old without her grandmother there to do it better. I'd already done the hardest things. I wasn't going to let Brent take the house too. Here's what I believe, and it's not complicated. The way you treat people teaches them what you'll accept. Every time I swallowed something that should have been said, I was teaching Brent that the floor had no bottom. Every time Sandra asked me to be patient, and I was teaching her that her father's comfort was negotiable. I did that. Not Brent, not Sandra, me. And the moment I understood that, I stopped being angry at them and started being honest with myself. Wisdom, in my experience, isn't a thing you acquire all at once. It accumulates like interest. Slowly, invisibly, and then suddenly, you have more than you realized. I didn't know how to handle that first Sunday phone call the way I should have. I know how to handle it now, not because I read something or someone taught me, but because I lived through the cost of getting it wrong, kept notes on every line item of that cost, and decided the tuition was high enough. What Mia taught me, and she's 8 years old, she doesn't know she taught me anything, is that love and boundaries are not opposites. I loved that little girl so much I delayed a necessary thing for over a year to protect my morning hours with her. And when the necessary thing finally happened, those mornings didn't disappear. They're still there. She still comes on weekends. The animal shows are still running. The flamingo made it into the backpack. That's the thing nobody tells you about holding a firm line. You don't lose the people who actually love you. You just find out who they are. Brent called in January. He said 2 words that were more than I expected from him. Sandra calls every Sunday without fail. The roses are doing better because I finally stopped being afraid to cut them. You don't have to be cruel to be clear. You don't have to be loud to be firm. You just have to decide, really decide, not just think about deciding, that your home, your name, and your life belong to you, and then act like it. I'm 64 years old. I learned that later than I should have. But I learned it